3 weeks before our wedding, Eliza Ricci thought she found her golden ticket when tech mogul Brandon Pierce slid into her DMEs with promises of penthouses and private jets. She dumped me via text, calling me a small-time nobody who could never give her the luxury lifestyle she deserved. What Eliza didn't know was that, while she was planning her new life with Brandon, I had just finalized the biggest acquisition of my career through my private investment firm. The company I bought, Pierce Technologies, Brandon's entire empire, worth $2.8 billion for 5 years. Eliza thought she knew me as Jasper Lewis, the quiet software consultant who worked modest contracts. She had no idea that behind the scenes, I was the anonymous founder of Zenith Capital, one of the most powerful investment firms in Silicon Valley. Now, as Brandon scrambles to understand why his company was sold from under him, Eliza is about to learn that the small-time nobody she threw away controls her new boyfriend's entire future. And honestly, I'm just getting started before we jump back in. Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Most people think success. It happens overnight, but the truth is, I'd been building my empire in the shadows for 7 years before Eliza even knew my name. It all started back in college at Northwestern, where I was studying computer science while everyone else was partying their way through their trust funds. My roommate, Felix Ferrari, used to joke that I lived like a monk, no expensive clothes, no flashy car, eating ramen for dinner while coding until 3 a.m. What Felix didn't know was that those late nights weren't just homework. I was building trading algorithms that would eventually become the foundation of Zenith Capital. See, while my classmates were learning basic programming, I was obsessed with financial markets. I'd spend entire weekends analyzing tech company valuations, reading SEC filings, and building models that could predict which startups would explode and which would crash. By my junior year, I'd turned a $5,000 student loan into $50,000. Through strategic options trading, but here's the thing about real wealth. It requires patience and invisibility. Every financial advisor will tell you that the moment you start flashing money around, you become a target. Taxes increase. People start asking questions, and suddenly everyone wants a piece of your success. So I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. I would remain completely anonymous. After graduation, I moved to Portland and took a job as a mid-level software consultant at Morrison Tech Solutions. I was just Jasper Lewis, the quiet guy who worked remote contracts, drove a used Honda Civic, and lived in a modest apartment in the Hawthorne district. The perfect cover story. What my coworkers didn't see was the basement office in my seemingly ordinary rental house, equipped with 6 monitors, fiber optic internet, and direct connections to every major financial exchange in the world. Oh well. They thought I was debugging database systems for $75 an hour. I was actually managing a portfolio that would eventually grow to control hundreds of millions in assets. The breakthrough came in 2019, when I identified a pattern in how venture capital firms were valuing AI startups. Most investors were getting caught up in the hype and overpaying for companies with impressive demos, but no real revenue models. Meanwhile, there were solid, profitable tech companies being completely overlooked because they weren't sexy enough. For Silicon Valley, I started Zenith Capital with a simple strategy: buy undervalued companies with strong fundamentals. Then either flip them to bigger players or hold them long-term for the income stream. The name Zenith wasn't an accident. It represented the peak, the highest point, exactly where I intended to take every investment by 2021. Zenith Capital had quietly acquired controlling interests in 12 different companies, from a cybersecurity firm in Austin to a logistics software company in Denver. The beauty of the setup was that all transactions went through a network of shell companies and legal representatives. Even the companies I owned had no idea who their real boss was. The legal structure was bulletproof. Zenith Capital was officially owned by Meridian Holdings, which was owned by Cascade Investments, which was owned by Northwest Ventures. A maze of LLCs and corporations that would take a team of forensic accountants months to untangle. And at the center of it all was me, living in my rental house in Portland, wearing the same 3 button-down shirts to my consulting meetings. My friends at Morrison Tech thought I was stuck in a dead-end career. Flix would call me up from San Francisco, where he was making $200,000 at Google, trying to convince me to stop playing it safe and apply for real tech jobs. Little did he know that my side investments were pulling in more money each month than his entire annual salary. The consulting work wasn't just a cover story, though. It served a crucial purpose: intelligence gathering. With gave me inside access to their business operations, their pain points, their competitors, and most importantly, their acquisition targets. Information that was worth its weight in gold when it came to making investment decisions. I remember one particularly profitable example from early 2022. While consulting for a mid-sized e-commerce platform, I learned they were desperately trying to acquire a payment processing company called StreamPay. The e-commerce platform was willing to pay up to $400 million, but StreamPay's current owners were asking for $600 million. Way overpriced. 3 weeks later, Zenith Capital approached StreamPay with a different offer: $250 million in cash, with the deal closing in 10 days instead of the typical 6-month process. StreamPay jumped at the offer. 2 months after that, I sold StreamPay to the e-commerce platform for $380 million, netting a $130 million profit in under 90 days. This was the pattern that built my empire. While everyone else was fighting over the obvious deals, I was finding opportunities in the gaps, companies that needed quick exits, mismatched buyer-seller expectations, and market inefficiencies that only someone with perfect information could exploit. By the time I met Eliza in 2023, Zenith Capital was managing assets worth over $1.2 billion. But to her, I was just the guy in worn jeans who showed up at Grind Coffee on Burnside every Tuesday morning, typing away on a 5-year-old laptop. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, controlling more wealth than most Fortune 500 CEOs, and I was still drinking $3 coffee while sitting on furniture I'd bought from Craigslist. But that anonymity was my greatest asset. In a world where everyone was trying to signal their success through Instagram posts and luxury purchases, being invisible gave me unlimited freedom to operate. The consulting business had another unexpected benefit. It taught me how to read people. After years of walking into corporate boardrooms and quickly assessing who held real power versus who was just posturing, I developed an almost supernatural ability to spot authenticity. I could tell within minutes whether someone was genuinely brilliant or just good at playing the game. This skill would prove crucial when I started dating seriously. Because when you're secretly worth hundreds of millions of dollars, every relationship carries the risk that someone is only interested in your money. The consulting persona was the perfect filter. Anyone who could love a modest software developer working hourly contracts was someone worth getting to know, of course. There were challenges to living this double life I couldn't tell anyone about. My real achievements, couldn't celebrate major wins, couldn't even buy myself nice things without raising questions. Some nights, after closing a particularly complex deal, I'd sit in my basement office feeling completely isolated. Success without anyone to share it with can be surprisingly hollow. But I'd learned that patience was everything in this business. The real players in finance weren't the flashy hedge fund managers you see on CNBC. They were the quiet operators moving billions of dollars behind the scenes, never seeking credit or attention. That's who I was becoming. Every sacrifice felt worth it when I looked at my portfolio's growth trajectory. By late 2023, I was ready to start making some bigger moves. Pierce Technologies had caught my attention months earlier, a company that looked impressive on paper, but had some fundamental flaws that most investors couldn't see. Brandon Pierce was exactly the kind of CEO who prioritized flash over substance, and his company was ripe for a takeover. I just had no idea that acquiring Pierce Technologies would end up intersecting with my personal life in the most dramatic way possible. I met Eliza Ricci on a rainy Tuesday morning in October 2023. And honestly, it was the most perfectly ordinary moment that would completely derail my carefully controlled life. She was sitting at my usual table at Grind Coffee, frantically typing on her laptop while juggling a phone call about wedding centerpieces. "No, Mom," I said, blush pink. "Not Dusty Rose," she was saying, gesturing dramatically with her free hand. There's a difference. And yes, it matters for the Instagram photos. When she finally hung up and noticed me standing there with my coffee, looking awkwardly at the occupied table, she immediately started apologizing. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. You probably sit here every day, don't you? I can totally move. I'm just dealing with wedding planning chaos and... It's fine," I said, though I was genuinely thrown off. Routine was everything in my world. This woman had just disrupted 7 months of identical Tuesday mornings. But then she smiled, and something shifted. Eliza had this way of lighting up a room that was impossible to ignore. Her auburn hair was escaping from what was probably supposed to be a professional bun. She was wearing a paint-stained blazer over dark jeans, and she radiated the kind of creative energy that made my methodical, calculated world suddenly feel very small. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Wedding. Planning, I asked, settling into the chair across from her instead of finding another table. Unfortunately. Getting married in March. Apparently I need to have opinions about things like napkin fold styles and signature cocktail names. She rolled her eyes, but there was something about the way she said it that made me think maybe the wedding wasn't as exciting as it should have been. What do you do when you're not debating the merits of blush versus dusty rose? I'm an interior designer. Well, trying to be. I work for Hawthorne Design Studios, which is basically code for I arrange furniture for rich people who have no taste but lots of money. She gestured around the coffee shop. What about you? Let me guess. ... Tech. Software consulting. Nothing glamorous. The lie came easily after years of practice. Mostly database optimization for small businesses. We ended up talking for 2 hours. Eliza told me about her dreams of starting her own design firm, about growing up in a small town in Oregon where her biggest rebellion was painting her bedroom walls black in high school. She was funny, self-deprecating, and had this way of making even mundane stories sound fascinating. When I finally had to leave for a client meeting, it's actually a video call with the CEO of a biotech startup. I was considering acquiring. Eliza was packing up her wedding planning materials. Same time next week? She asked, and something in her voice suggested she hoped I'd say yes. I almost said no. Dating had always been complicated given my double life, and she was getting married in 5 months. But there was something about Eliza that made me want to take the risk. Sure, but maybe you'll have the centerpiece crisis resolved by then. She laughed. Don't count on it. Apparently next week I need to choose between ivory and champagne charger plates. My life is very serious and important. That became our thing. Tuesday morning coffee dates where Eliza would update me on the latest wedding planning drama, while I pretended to be stressed about software bugs and difficult clients. Week after week. I found myself looking forward to these conversations more than any business deal. The wedding talk gradually shifted, though. Instead of excited planning sessions, Eliza started expressing doubts. Her fiancé Tyler was a marketing manager for a local brewery, and according to Eliza, he was more excited about the bachelor party in Vegas than actually getting married. He keeps talking about how marriage is the end of fun, she told me in December, stirring her latte absently. Like being with me is some kind of prison sentence he's accepting for the sake of tradition. Maybe he's just nervous. Maybe. Or maybe we're getting married because we've been together for 3 years and it feels like the next logical step, not because we actually can't imagine life without each other. These were dangerous conversations for someone like me. Every week I was watching this incredible woman realize she might be making a mistake. And every week was falling a little harder for someone I couldn't fully be honest with. The turning point came in January. Eliza showed up to coffee looking devastated, her eyes red from crying. Tyler called off the wedding, she said without preamble. Apparently he's been having second thoughts for months, but didn't want to say anything because deposits were already paid. I felt a complicated mix of relief and anger on her behalf. I'm sorry, Eliza. That's awful timing. The worst part is that I'm not even heartbroken about Tyler. I'm embarrassed about having to return gifts and cancel vendors. I'm not actually sad about losing him. She looked up at me with watery eyes. What kind of person does that make me? The kind who deserves better than someone who sees marriage as the end of fun? That was the day everything changed between us. Instead of our usual table by the window, we ended up walking through Laurelhurst Park, talking about everything except wedding planning for the first time in months. Eliza told me about her real dreams, not just starting a design firm, but creating spaces that actually meant something to people. She wanted to work with families buying their first homes, not just wealthy clients looking for status symbols. Love the idea of helping someone create a space where they'll make memories, she said, as we sat on a bench overlooking the pond. It's like, this is where your kid will take their first steps. This is the kitchen where you'll teach them to cook. That's real design work, not just picking expensive furniture. I found myself sharing more than I ever had with anyone. Obviously, I couldn't tell her about Zenith Capital, but I talked about my frustrations with consulting work, my desire to do something more meaningful. For someone living such an isolated double life, having these conversations was like oxygen. 3 weeks later, Lisa officially moved out of the apartment she'd shared with Tyler and into a small studio in the Pearl District. We started seeing each other outside of Tuesday coffee dates, dinner at small restaurants, hiking in the Columbia River Gorge, spending entire Saturdays browsing through vintage furniture stores. The relationship developed slowly, carefully. Eliza was rebuilding her entire life, and I was trying to figure out how to navigate dating someone while maintaining my elaborate cover story. But for the first time in years, I found myself wanting to share my real life with someone. By March, the month that would have been her wedding, we were officially together. Lisa had started freelancing, taking on smaller residential projects that aligned with her values. She was happier than I'd ever seen her. Full of plans and dreams for her future business, I was falling in love, not just with Eliza, but with the version of myself I was when I was with her. The consulting persona had started as a necessity, but around Eliza, it felt less like acting and more like discovering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. You know what I love about you, Jasper? She said one evening as we were cooking dinner in my modest kitchen. You're so real. Like you don't need to impress anyone or prove anything. You just are who you are. The irony was almost painful. Here was this woman falling in love with my authenticity, while I was living the most elaborate lie imaginable. But in those moments, cooking together in my rental house kitchen, I could almost forget about the basement office and the billions in assets and just be the guy she thought I was. We talked about the future constantly. Eliza wanted to expand her design business, maybe open a small showroom. I encouraged her dreams while secretly calculating how I could help make them happen without revealing my true resources. It was a delicate balance, being supportive without being suspicious. The relationship felt different from anything I'd experienced before. With previous girlfriends, I'd always been holding back, always aware of the massive secret I was keeping. But Eliza made me want to be completely honest, even as I knew that honesty would change everything between us. By the summer of 2024, we were talking about moving in together. Eliza had landed several major freelance projects and was ready to take the next step in both her career and our relationship. I was secretly planning how to gradually introduce more stability into our lives, maybe landing a better consulting contract that would allow us to upgrade our living situation. What I didn't know was that Eliza's growing confidence and success were attracting attention from people who would soon change everything. August 15th, 2024, I remember the exact date, because it was the day my two worlds collided in the most spectacular way imaginable. I was in my basement office, reviewing the final due diligence reports for the Pierce Technologies acquisition, when Eliza came home from what was supposed to be a routine client consultation. Jasper, you'll never believe the opportunity I just got. She called from upstairs, her voice electric with excitement. I saved my files and headed up to the kitchen, where Eliza was practically bouncing on her toes, still clutching her portfolio bag. Remember that high-end residential project I told you about? The one where the client wanted to remain anonymous until we signed the contract? I nodded. For the past 3 weeks, Eliza had been working with some mysterious client who'd reached out through her website, requesting a complete interior redesign of a penthouse in the South Waterfront District. The budget was enormous, bigger than anything she'd ever worked on, but the client insisted on absolute discretion until the contracts were finalized. Well, I just met him, and Jasper, This could change everything for my business. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to what looked like a professional headshot. His name is Brandon Pierce, and he's the CEO of Pierce Technologies. Do you know how huge that company is? My blood went cold. I knew exactly how huge Pierce Technologies was. I'd been studying every aspect of the company for 6 months, preparing for what would be the largest acquisition in Zenith Capital's history. Brandon Pierce was about to become my employee, though he had no idea yet. Tech company? I managed to ask, hoping my voice sounded normal. One of the biggest in the Pacific Northwest. Brandon said he's worth over $400 million, and get this, he wants me to design not just his penthouse, but also the executive offices for his new headquarters building. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar contract, Jasper. This could be the project that launches my firm into the big leagues. I forced myself to smile and congratulate her, even as my mind was racing. The timing was too coincidental. Pierce Technologies was hemorrhaging money due to Brandon's poor management decisions, something my financial analysis had revealed months ago. The company was weeks away from a major cash flow crisis, yet Brandon was hiring expensive interior designers? That's incredible, babe. When do you start? He wants to move fast, like really fast. We're supposed to have dinner tomorrow night to discuss the details. Lisa's eyes were shining with excitement. He said he's impressed with my vision and wants to work exclusively with me on all his properties. The next evening, I was in my basement office, monitoring the final stages of the Pierce Technologies acquisition, when Eliza left for her dinner meeting. She looked stunning in a black dress I'd never seen before, her hair professionally styled. "Don't wait up," she said, kissing me goodbye. Brandon said we might need to go late to cover everything. He's flying to New York tomorrow morning, so tonight's our only chance to finalize the contract details. 3 hours later, I was still working when my phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. Meeting running longer than expected. Contract negotiations. Our complex will probably be very late. Love ya. I thought nothing of it. Big contracts were complicated, and Eliza was probably just being thorough. I went to bed around midnight assuming she'd be home by morning. She wasn't. I woke up too. Text sent at 3:47 a.m. Staying at Heathman Hotel tonight. Too tired to drive home safely. Talk tomorrow. That's when the first red flag went up. Eliza lived 15 minutes from downtown Portland. And since when did she stay at hotels instead of just calling an Uber? The next morning she came home around 10 a.m., still wearing the same black dress, her makeup smudged and her hair disheveled. "How did the meeting go?" I asked, trying to keep suspicion out of my voice. "Amazing. Better than I could have imagined." But something was off about her tone. She wasn't making eye contact, and she seemed almost guilty. Brandon is. He's really something special, Jasper. This partnership is going to be incredible. Over the next week, Eliza's behavior became increasingly strange. She was constantly on her phone, texting and taking calls that she'd step outside to answer. She started working late several nights a week, always claiming it was Pierce Technologies. "Business Brandon is just really hands-on," she explained when I questioned the long hours. "He wants to be involved in every decision. It's actually refreshing to work with someone who cares so much about the details." Meanwhile, in my parallel world, the Pierce Technologies acquisition was moving forward exactly as planned. My legal team had identified the perfect moment to strike. Brandon had overextended the company's credit lines to fund a flashy new marketing campaign, leaving Pierce Technologies vulnerable to a hostile takeover. What I discovered during the final due diligence phase made everything click into place. Brandon Pierce wasn't actually worth $400 million. He was leveraged up to his eyeballs, living off credit and desperately trying to maintain the appearance of wealth while his company collapsed around him. The penthouse he wanted Eliza to redesign. He was 3 months behind on the mortgage payments. Brandon Pierce was a fraud, and somehow my fiancé was getting pulled into his web. The night everything unraveled was September 3rd. I was supposed to be in Seattle for a consulting contract, but I'd actually stayed local to monitor some time-sensitive trades. Around 9 p.m., I decided to surprise Eliza by picking up dinner from her favorite Thai restaurant. When I arrived at her studio apartment in the Pearl District, the lights were off and her car was gone. I called her phone. "Hey babe, what's up?" Her voice was breathless, with music and conversations in the background. "I wanted to surprise you with dinner. Where are you?" "Oh, I'm still working on the Pierce project. We're at his penthouse, going over fabric samples. It's probably going to be here for a few more hours." The lie was so casual, so effortless, that it took my breath away. I knew exactly where Brandon Pierce's penthouse was. I'd been reviewing the property records as part of the acquisition. More importantly, I knew that Brandon was currently in San Francisco, desperately trying to secure emergency funding from venture capital firms. I drove to the South Waterfront anyway, just to confirm what I already knew. Brandon's building was dark, the penthouse clearly empty. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I used my resources at Zenith Capital to have Brandon Pierce tracked. Within 2 hours, I had my answer. Brandon and Eliza were at the Nines Hotel downtown. Registered under Brandon's name in a suite that cost $2,000 per night. Money he definitely didn't have. I sat in my car outside the hotel until 2 a.m., watching the entrance, trying to process what was happening. The woman I loved, who had told me she valued authenticity above everything else, was having an affair with a man who was essentially a financial con artist. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing that Eliza had fallen for exactly the kind of superficial wealth and status that I'd been avoiding my entire adult life. She was choosing the flash over the substance, the lie over the truth. The next morning, Eliza came home with another elaborate story about working late on urgent revisions to Brandon's design plans. She showered and changed clothes while I sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and trying to figure out how to handle the situation. "How much longer do you think this project will take?" I asked when she emerged from the bedroom. "Actually, Brandon and I had a breakthrough last night. The timeline might be accelerating. He's so passionate about getting everything perfect." She was glowing in a way I hadn't seen since the early days of our relationship. "Jasper, I know I've been distracted lately, but this project could set me up for life. Brandon has connections to people who could transform my entire career." When I knew it wasn't just about interior design anymore, Eliza was falling for Brandon's promises of a bigger, more glamorous life, exactly the life she thought I couldn't provide. "That's great," I said, forcing myself to smile. "I'm proud of you." But inside, I was already planning my next move. While Eliza thought she was upgrading from a small-time software consultant to a tech billionaire, she had no idea that her small-time boyfriend was about to become her tech billionaire's boss. And I was going to make sure she found out in the most dramatic way possible. September 10th, 2024. I'd spent a week planning exactly how to handle this. I decided the confrontation needed to happen in a way that would expose both of their lies simultaneously. I knew from tracking Brandon's movements that he and Eliza had a standing Tuesday evening design meeting at his penthouse. The same night Eliza told me she was working late at her studio. This particular Tuesday, I decided to pay them a surprise visit at 8 p.m. I stood outside Brandon's building in the South Waterfront, looking up at the penthouse that was 3 months behind on mortgage payments. Through my contacts at Zenith Capital, I'd already arranged for building security to give me access, after all. I was about to own the management company that held the building's commercial loans. The elevator ride to the 30th floor felt like the longest 2 minutes of my life. When I reached Brandon's penthouse, I could hear music and laughter through the door. I used the access code my security contact had provided and walked in. The scene was exactly what I'd expected, but somehow still managed to take my breath away. Eliza was sitting on Brandon's couch in a silk dress I'd never seen before, holding a glass of champagne that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Brandon was showing her something on his tablet, his hand resting casually on her knee. "Jasper." Eliza's voice cracked when she saw me. The champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" "Who is this guy?" "This," I said, stepping fully into the room, "is Jasper Lewis, also known as the small-time software consultant your girlfriend here has been cheating on." The color drained from Eliza's face. Jasper, I can explain, can you? Out. My phone and showed them both the photos my private investigator had taken over the past 2 weeks. Because these pictures of you two at the Nines Hotel, the Heathman, that restaurant in the Pearl District, they tell a pretty clear story. Brandon finally found his voice. Look, man, I don't know what your deal is, but Eliza and I are business partners. We're working on a major design project. Are you? I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to make them both flinch. That's interesting, Brandon, because I happen to know that you're currently 3 months behind on the mortgage for this penthouse. I also know that Pierce Technologies has a negative cash flow of $2.3 million per month and is approximately 6 weeks away from bankruptcy. Brandon's confident expression faltered. I don't know where you're getting your information, but I'm getting it from the same place I got the access code to your building, I said. See, here's the thing you both don't know about me. I'm not actually a small-time software consultant. Eliza was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. What are you talking about? I'm the founder and managing partner of Zenith Capital. We're a private investment firm that specializes in acquiring undervalued and distressed technology companies. I turned to Brandon. Companies like Pierce Technologies, which we purchased yesterday for $2.8 billion. The silence that followed was deafening. Brandon's face went through several different expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror. That's impossible, he whispered. Pierce Technologies isn't for sale. Actually, it was. Your board of directors voted unanimously to accept our offer once they saw your company's real financial situation. Apparently, they weren't aware that you'd been using corporate credit lines to fund your personal lifestyle.
I gestured around the expensive penthouse.
Including this place. Eliza found her voice first. Jasper, this is insane. You're a software consultant. You drive a Honda Civic. You live in a rental house in Hawthorne. I live in a rental house because anonymity is important in my line of work. The Honda Civic is because I don't need to prove anything to anyone through flashy purchases. Looked directly at her. Unlike some people. Brandon had gone pale. What you're saying is true? Then you're no longer the CEO of Pierce Technologies. You're not worth $400 million. And this penthouse, along with everything else you've been using to impress my ex-fiancé, is about to be repossessed. Ex-fiancé. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. Well, I assume that's what you'd want, considering you've spent the last month sleeping with someone you thought was a billionaire. I pulled out the engagement ring I'd been carrying in my pocket, but just to make it official. ... I set the ring on Brandon's coffee table. I think this belongs to you now, Eliza. Along with Brandon's debt portfolio, which I estimated about $47 million. That's when Eliza finally exploded. You've been lying to me for 2 years. How can you stand there acting like you're the victim? I never lied about who I was as a person. You fell in love with someone you thought was authentic and genuine, and I am those things. I just happened to also be successful. I looked between them. But you threw all of that away the moment someone dangled a shinier offer in front of you. Brandon was frantically scrolling through his phone. This can't be legal. There has to be something. There is, I said. You can try to fight the acquisition in court. Of course, that'll require hiring lawyers. You can't afford to challenge a purchase that was completely legal and above board. I turned back to Eliza one last time. You know what's funny? I was actually planning to tell you the truth about Zenith Capital. I was going to propose next month and start building a real life together. But you saved me the trouble of finding out whether you actually loved me or just the idea of being with someone successful. As I walked toward the door, I could hear Eliza calling my name, but I didn't turn around. The confrontation had gone exactly as I'd planned. But somehow I felt no satisfaction from it, only the certainty that both of them were about to learn some very expensive lessons about the difference between real success and its cheap imitation. The next morning, I woke up in my modest rental house for the last time. Not because I was moving somewhere flashier, but because it was time to start operating from my real office. I'd maintained the consulting persona for 7 years, but now that my cover was blown, there was no point in continuing the charade. Drove to downtown Portland, to a building I'd owned for 3 years but never set foot in. The 15th floor of the Bancorp Tower housed the official headquarters of Zenith Capital, minus 4,000 square feet of understated elegance that most people assumed to belong to some boring financial services company. My assistant Sarah greeted me at the elevator. "Mr. Lewis, welcome to the office. I have the Pierce Technologies integration plan ready for your review." "Perfect. And Sarah, cancel all my Morrison Tech consulting contracts. Won't be needing that cover anymore." The first item on my agenda was a video conference with Pierce Technologies' board of directors. These were the same people who'd voted to sell the company to Zenith Capital, but who had no idea that their mysterious buyer was someone Brandon had significantly underestimated. "Gentlemen," I said as their faces appeared on my conference room screen, "I'm sure you're curious about our plans for Pierce Technologies." Board Chairman Robert Chen nodded. "We're eager to understand the transition timeline, Mr. Lewis. Brandon Pierce has been difficult to work with during this process. I imagine he has been. Which brings me to my first executive decision." I leaned forward. "Effective immediately. Brandon Pierce is terminated from all positions within Pierce Technologies and its subsidiaries. He's also being sued for misappropriation of corporate assets and breach of fiduciary duty." The board members exchanged glances. "That's aggressive," one of them said. Brandon used corporate credit lines to fund a $47 million personal lifestyle, while hiding the company's financial difficulties from investors and board members. I'd call that criminal, not aggressive. I opened a folder on my desk of documentation showing he charged everything from luxury hotel suites to expensive dinners to the corporate accounts, claiming they were business expenses. What I didn't mention was that many of those expensive dinners were his dates with Eliza. Our legal team will handle the details, but I wanted you to know that Pierce Technologies is now under competent management. I expect the company's valuation to increase by 40% within the next fiscal year. After the board meeting, I turned my attention to Brandon's personal situation. Using Zenith Capital's resources, I'd already initiated foreclosure proceedings on his penthouse, his Maserati, and his vacation home in Bend. But that was just the beginning. I called my head of security, former FBI investigator named Martinez, who specialized in financial crimes. "Martinez, I need you to look into Brandon Pierce's personal finances. I want to know every debt, every asset, every financial obligation he has. Already on it, boss. Preliminary report shows he owes approximately $47.3 million to various creditors. Credit cards, personal loans, private investors who think they're funding Pierce Technologies projects. Interesting. And his liquid assets? Maybe $200,000 in checking accounts. Everything else is leveraged or borrowed against future earnings from Pierce Technologies, which he no longer has." Exactly. Nah. Brandon Pierce had gone from fake billionaire to unemployed debtor with a negative net worth of over $47 million. But I wasn't done yet. The next call I made was to Margot Davies, a journalist at TechCrunch who'd been investigating questionable startup valuations in the Pacific Northwest. "Margot, it's Jasper Lewis from Zenith Capital. I have a story that might interest you, Zenith Capital." "Wait, you're the anonymous investor everyone's been trying to identify for years." "Not anonymous anymore. And I have some information about Brandon Pierce and Pierce Technologies that your readers would find fascinating." I sent Margot a carefully curated package of information, all public records and legal documents, but presented in a way that told the complete story of Brandon's financial fraud and fake lifestyle. By 3 p.m., TechCrunch had published an article titled "The Fake Tech Billionaire: How Brandon Pierce Built an Empire of Debt." The article went viral within hours. By evening, every major tech publication was covering the story. Brandon Pierce became the poster child for startup culture, excess, and financial irresponsibility. But I saved the most important call for last. "Felix, it's Jasper." My old college roommate sounded confused. "Jasper? Dude, I was just reading this crazy article about some tech CEO. And there's a guy quoted with your exact name who claims to run some investment firm worth billions. Weird coincidence, right? Felix, I need to tell you something. That guy isn't a coincidence?" 20 minutes later, after explaining the entire situation, Felix was laughing so hard he could barely speak. You're telling me that for the past 7 years, while I've been worried about you being stuck in consulting purgatory, you've been secretly running a billion-dollar investment empire? Pretty much. Your fiancé left you for some fraudster, who you're now destroying financially. That's the basic outline, yes. Jasper, this is the best story I've ever heard. Please tell me you're going to let me watch this play out. Actually, I was hoping you might want to join Zenith Capital as our West Coast operations manager. I'm expanding the firm, and I could use someone I trust. That evening, I sat in my real office, looking out over the Portland skyline, watching. News helicopters circled Brandon's building where reporters were trying to get comments about his bankruptcy filing. My phone had been buzzing all day with calls from Eliza, but I hadn't answered. There would be time to deal with that later. Right now. I was focused on the most satisfying part of this entire situation. Watching someone who'd built their life on lies discover the consequences of underestimating authentic success. Tomorrow, I would start rebuilding Pierce Technologies into the company it should have been. But tonight, I was enjoying the knowledge that Brandon Pierce had learned a very expensive lesson about the difference between real money and borrowed time, and Eliza was about to learn her own lesson about the cost of choosing flash over substance. 3 months later, the transformation was complete. Pierce Technologies had been restructured, refinanced, and was already showing the 40% valuation increase I'd promised the board. Under competent management, the company that Brandon had nearly destroyed was becoming one of the most profitable tech firms in the Pacific Northwest. Brandon Pierce, meanwhile, had filed for bankruptcy and was facing federal charges for wire fraud and embezzlement. The last I'd heard, he was living in his parents' basement in suburban Seattle, working at a retail electronics store to pay quartered restitution. His fall from fake billionaire to actual minimum wage worker had been swift and absolute. But the real surprise came when Eliza started reaching out. It began with voicemails in late September. Yes, please call me back. I made a terrible mistake and I need to explain. And emails. Then showing up at coffee shops where she thought I might be, apparently forgetting that I no longer needed to maintain my Tuesday morning routine at Grind Coffee. Finally, in mid-December, she managed to corner me outside the Banker Power as I was leaving work. Jasper, please, just 5 minutes. I looked at her standing on the sidewalk in the December rain. 3 months had not been kind to Eliza. She looked exhausted, her usual creative energy replaced by something that looked like desperation. 5 minutes, I agreed. I know what I did was unforgivable, she started, but I need you to understand. Understand what? That you threw away 2 years of a relationship for someone you thought had more money than me. It wasn't about the money. But even as she said it, we both knew it was a lie. Okay, maybe it was partly about the money. Brandon made me feel like I could have this incredible life, like all my problems would just disappear. What problems, Eliza? Building a successful design business? You were happy. I was scared. The words burst out of her. Scared that I'd never be more than someone who arranges furniture for rich people. Brandon promised me connections, opportunities, a chance to work on projects that mattered. And instead you've got fraud charges and a boyfriend who can't even afford his own car anymore? She flinched. You don't have to be cruel about it. I'm not being cruel. I'm being honest. You want to know the real irony? I was planning to help you expand your business. I had connections to real estate developers, hotel chains, people who could have given you exactly the kind of opportunities you wanted, but you never gave me the chance. Because you never told me who you really were. I told you exactly who. I just didn't tell you how much money I had. The fact that the money was the deciding factor for you tells me everything. I need to know about what our relationship really meant to you. Lisa was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in the rain. So that's it? You're just going to throw away everything we had? I'm not throwing anything away. You already did that the night you chose Brandon's penthouse over our life together. I turned to walk away, then stopped. You know what's really sad, Eliza? You'd just been honest with me about wanting more opportunities, about feeling scared, or limited. We could have figured it out together.
Instead,
you decided I wasn't enough, and went looking for someone who could give you a shortcut to the life you thought you deserved. And what am I supposed to do now? It's the same thing you should have done from the beginning. Build something real with your own hands, instead of trying to attach yourself to someone else's success. 6 months later, I was having lunch with Felix at a restaurant in the Pearl District. When I saw her, Eliza was sitting at a small table by the window, wearing jeans and a sweater I remembered from our early days together, working on what looked like design sketches. "Is that her?" Felix asked, following my gaze. "Yeah, she looks ... normal. She always was normal." That was what I loved about her. Felix studied my expression. "Any regrets?" I thought about it for a moment, about ending things. But I do. Regret that she felt like she had to choose between authenticity and ambition. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. You think she's learned that now? Through the window, I watched Eliza carefully shading what looked like a kitchen design. The same focused expression she used to have when she talked about creating meaningful spaces for families. She looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with at Grind Coffee, before Brandon Pierce and his promises of easy success had complicated everything. "Maybe," I said. "I hope so." As we left the restaurant, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. Eliza had made her choice, faced the consequences, and was apparently trying to rebuild her life on more solid ground. Had faced justice for his crimes, and was learning the hard way about the difference between earned success and borrowed time. And me? I was running a billion-dollar investment firm, working with people I trusted. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was living a double life. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's simply building something so authentic and successful that the people who underestimated you realize exactly what they walked away from. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.